Okay, let's continue with answering these questions that you've asked. So, Matthew McVeagh or McVeagh says, who are the other people we sometimes hear in the background what sound like children? Well, there won't be any children. I always film at home, so it would be my mum or my brother. What effect do you imagine you have? Probably not much. It's quite a small channel. I don't imagine it's ever going to be a really big channel. It's quite a niche area, I would imagine. Although I don't know, I think that there are some channels that have gotten pretty big doing philosophy. I think the Wireless Philosophy YouTube channel, I don't know how many subscribers they've got, but I think it's a lot more than me, so I don't know, maybe I could expand, but I suppose with the kind of videos that I do, quite long, quite dry lectures, basically, I wouldn't expect to become all that popular with it. What in your choice of format, structure, presentation, etc. do you think is necessary to get the result you want? I don't know. I mean, I just write a script, I put in what I think are the important points, and then I just do a PowerPoint because it's easier. It's just the easiest way to do it, and I just summarise, what I'm going to say. I mean, that's really. I have never really thought much about the presentation of it, mainly because I sort of feel like the ideas that I'm presenting, if they're interesting ideas, and I think that the topics are interesting, then they sort of they're interesting in themselves. It doesn't need any frills, I guess. So yeah, I just present the ideas and summarise it in a PowerPoint. If you were somehow not able to do these videos, would you feel a lack or frustration? Could you do something else to achieve the same end? I think it would be very frustrating, and I don't think there's anything else that is quite the same medium. I mean, obviously, if I was kicked off YouTube or something like that, I'd just go to some other video hosting site. Presumably, I wouldn't get as many views, but I'd still be able to do the same kind of thing. But if I couldn't do videos, I think that would be a real loss. Obviously, you can present the same kind of information in a blog post or something like that, but I think that there is something quite different about a video. There's having the main points summarised where you can read, and then having somebody actually explain it in speech is a different way of getting the information, and I think that can be easier, especially when you are coming to something for the first time, which I imagine a lot of people watching my videos will be. They're designed to be introductory videos, so you're going to be in many cases encountering that information for the first time, and in that case I think having somebody speak it is better. Would you agree that your central philosophical interest is epistemology? Certainly, yeah, I think so. I think most of my concerns are basically around epistemology. I mean, what are the main philosophical areas, right? There's metaphysics. Well, I tend to think that metaphysics is basically misguided. I enjoy metaphysics, and obviously if you watch my channel you can see there's loads of videos on metaphysics, but my own view is that that whole sort of field is misguided. There's logic, of course, but then I suppose logic has sort of become its own field in a way, or maybe it's become a kind of branch of mathematics. I mean, if you're just thinking about developing logical systems, that really is a kind of mathematics now. On the other hand, if you're thinking of logic in terms of, well, what are the principles of correct reasoning or something like that, what are the principles of reasoning that will lead you to the truth? If you're thinking of it in those terms, then that's kind of epistemology. Then there's ethics, of course, but I'm a complete anti-realist on ethics. So yeah, I suppose epistemology is basically my main concern. What arguments would you put forward to defend the relevance of philosophy in the world today? Well, part of it obviously is, I think that there are just some fairly clear cases where philosophy matters. If we think about ethics, bioethics, I mean that has applications just to your everyday life, because people need to think about ethics, they need to think about how to act. I mean, everybody does, right? Well, I don't know, maybe psychopaths don't, but a lot of people do. A lot of people care about that. And it's going to matter for things like standards of medical practice and so to bioethics, that kind of thing. Then there are cases where I think philosophical discussion connects with science. So one example would be if we think about trying to measure biodiversity, we need to count species. So one aspect of biodiversity is species richness, how many species there are. Obviously this is a big problem in the world today because we're experiencing massive loss of species and everything. Biodiversity, conservation, biology, that's a big field. But when we think about counting species, obviously that depends very much on what our criterion for a species is. It depends on how we're defining species. And that, I think, is a more philosophical problem. Certainly scientists do talk about it, but it's one of these more conceptual problems, more kind of fundamental, foundational issues that I think philosophers can and have contributed to. So that's just one kind of example of where philosophy overlaps with science, and in a way that is quite relevant. And also, I think I mentioned this in the last video. I would be inclined to resist any attempt, sort of any assumption that philosophy has to be relevant or has to have a utility in order for it to be useful. Which I'm not saying that you were implying that, but obviously a lot of people do imply that. The idea is, well, philosophy is a waste of time because it has no practical applications. I think it does have practical applications, but I also think there are areas of philosophy that kind of don't, but they're still worthwhile. It's still interesting to think about. I suppose in some ways it's sort of a measure of the culture of a society. How much they encourage pursuits that are not practical, like the arts and like perhaps some areas of philosophy. Okay, how have your own philosophical opinions formed? How have they changed, and why do you think they have? I don't know really how they've formed. I suppose I just read about stuff and come to have views on it. I'm not really very self-reflective, I guess. I don't know how they formed. How have they changed? Well, I've been studying philosophy for quite a few years, and I mean, almost all of my philosophical views have changed. In fact, it would be a lot easier for me to just state the views that haven't changed. I mean, I started off, for instance, as an atheist, and I'm still an atheist, although actually I guess even that's changed because I've sort of moved to a more agnostic position, so maybe that's not a good example. But moral anti-realism, and anti-realism about value. I've always been very firmly on the anti-realist side, and I've just never budged on that. But with almost every other philosophical problem, I'm just constantly moving from one view to the other. I sort of have some sympathy for, I think it was Colin McGinn who suggested that the basic philosophical problems, the really big foundational philosophical problems, are basically just unresolvable. It's beyond our cognitive capacities to resolve them. And my own experience of my opinions constantly shifting has led me to have some sympathy for that kind of view. Mitboy says, you mentioned you like virtue ethics more than other normative systems. Did I? Okay. I'm curious, what virtues do you think are most important, and how will they be connected to actions? And Raffz Vieira has also asked about my views on ethics. So, if I said I liked virtue ethics, which I may have said that, I suppose I should clarify. When virtue ethics was first developed, it had a very non-theoretical approach to ethics. So deontology and consequentialism are they're like theories, and they're almost like scientific theories in a way, in that they sort of have rules and principles which are universal, in the same kind of way that science, or at least physics, develops universal principles and rules. I mean, deontology and consequentialism both offer algorithms for determining what the right action is in any given circumstance. They offer a decision procedure, basically, for determining the right action. And that just has never really gelled with my own approach to ethics. So I think that I think that morality arises out of our emotions, and we're not robots. The world, particularly the social world, is messy and very complex, and sometimes we sort of just face, I don't know, irresolvable dilemmas, and things are unclear. And there was something about the non-theoretical approach of the early virtue ethics that just seemed, in a way, more human and more appropriate to what morality actually is. Now, more recently, I think virtue ethics has been nailed down. It's become more of a comprehensive theory. And I wouldn't say, anyway, I wouldn't say that I'm a virtue ethicist. I don't accept virtue ethics. It's just that, I guess, it's a little bit more in line with my personality. So, if I said that I accepted virtue ethics, that's probably what I meant. So, anyway, you asked what sort of virtues I value. Well, I suppose virtue ethics is all about emphasising the moral exemplar, the virtuous person. My moral exemplars, I guess, would be David Hume, Charles Darwin, Lemmy from Motorhead. Maybe that answers your question. Right. Neha Pandey, or Pandey, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, asks, what keeps you going? I don't really know how to answer that question. That's pretty general, pretty vague. What keeps me going? What keeps me living is my overwhelming, crushing fear of death. That's why I continue to persist through time for as long as I can. I suppose what keeps me up in the morning, just things I enjoy. I really enjoy philosophy. My girlfriend, I really enjoy seeing her. She's great. And other family members. I don't know. I'm not really very good at those sorts of questions. All right. Oleksiy asks, any thoughts on antinatalism and negative-leaning ethics and lexical thresholds? I'll just do the antinatalism first. So I don't know much about antinatalism, but I don't know. It's not something I really care about that much. But I sort of feel like, we probably need to get the population lower. We have overpopulation problems, right? So I guess if we can persuade people to stop reproducing, then maybe that will be of benefit, in the future. But as for the actual arguments, do they work? Well, I don't really know, because I haven't looked into them very carefully. I have read Benatar's asymmetry argument, but I've not read a lot of literature about it. So I'll comment on it, but what I'm going to say probably, I don't know, you can tear me apart in the comments. Maybe what I'm going to say is total rubbish, because, as I say, I haven't read a lot about it. But Benatar's symmetry argument, as I understand it, is it's based on I say symmetry, it's an asymmetry argument. It's based on an asymmetry between pleasure and pain. So the thought is, if you imagine somebody who exists, an existent person, well, they will experience pleasures and they will experience pains. Now, the pain is bad, and the pleasure is good. On the other hand, if you think about somebody that doesn't exist, if somebody does not come into existence, well, then there will be no experiences. There'll just be a complete absence of experience. So there'll be an absence of pleasure and pain. And in this case, the idea is that the absence of pleasure is good. Sorry, the absence of pain is good, whereas the absence of pleasure is not bad. So if you were to sort of look at them both together, we've got the one case, the person exists, and we've got the pain, which is bad, and pleasure, which is good. Here, they just don't come into existence, and you've got the absence of pain, which is not bad, not good. Yeah, the absence of pain, which is good, and the absence. Oh God, what the hell? Yeah, and the absence of pleasure. I should have written this down. Jesus, man. Look. The point is, one of them is good and bad, and the other one is good and not bad, right? And so when you weigh those up, not coming into existence is better. Man, I really messed that one up, didn't I? So yeah, I mean, if you're encountering the asymmetry argument for the first time here, you should probably go and look it up online, because I completely bungled it. So, but anyway, my concern about this argument, well, one concern I have about it is why wouldn't it just equally apply to yourself right now, right? Why doesn't this entail that you should just kill yourself? Because presumably, just as we talk about bringing a person into existence and weighing it up like that, you could similarly ask about, well, what about your continued existence, say you existing in 10 years' time? So on the one hand, you've got you in 10 years' time where you exist, and then you've got 10 years' time where you don't exist anymore. And similarly, the asymmetry would be the same, right? So that's one, I guess, problem I have with it. It seems like quite an obvious problem. I imagine he's probably responded to that kind of thing, though. But I mean, another thing is that this rests on a kind of quite an almost utilitarian pleasure pain framework. I don't think that talking about pleasure and pain as these sort of abstract properties that you weigh up like that is really how I tend to think about things. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously we want more pleasure in the world and we want less pain. It's like a useful rule of thumb. But I'm not sure I would just say in general, in the abstract, that say pain is bad. So I guess that's another problem I would have with that argument. I know that's not really very well developed, but as I say, I haven't read a lot about it. Okay, Osithpem says, now this is quite a sort of detailed question. Maybe this kind of context isn't the best for answering this, but I'll do my best. Osithpem says, I am a supporter of solipsism and idealism. Sorry, let me just drink some. I'm a supporter of solipsism and idealism. Your main argument against this position seems to be that the following sentence is not contradictory. I am conceiving that there exists an object such that the object is unconceived. Okay, well, first of all, that's not an argument against idealism. That's an objection to Berkeley's argument for, Berkeley's master argument for idealism. So Berkeley has a specific argument for idealism, and that point that I made there is an objection to Berkeley's argument. When I say I made it, I mean I didn't make it. As far as I know, it's a pretty standard objection, which is, I think, fairly well accepted in the literature now. So yeah, it's basically the point that Berkeley, in the master argument, confuses the act of conception with the content of conception. So just as a clarification, that's not an argument against idealism. It's just an argument against Berkeley's argument for idealism. Anyway, you then continue, you respond to this. So, your main argument against this position seems to be that the following sentence is not contradictory. I am conceiving that there exists an object such that the object is unconceived. And then you say, but isn't that plain false? Of course, this sentence is also contradictory, though in disguise. if I conceive an arbitrary object as existing unconceived, then in this moment this very object is conceived by me and therefore does not exist as unconceived anymore. Well, yeah, but even if the object is conceived by you, you can still conceive of it as existing unconceived. So in general, even if an object has some property x, and even if you know that it has that property x, you can conceive of it as not having x. So an apple may be green, and maybe you know that it's green, but you can still conceive of it as being red. So conceptual abilities are not kind of constrained by facts. So yeah, I mean, you're right that if you conceive of an object as existing unconceived, then the object is conceived by you, so it's not actually unconceived, but you can still conceive of it as existing unconceived, I think. You can conceive of it as having different properties to what it actually has. And I suppose the more general point about this kind of argument that Berkeley makes and that you make is, I mean, to me it's just sort of philosophical trickery. It's semantic trickery, semantic sleight of hand in a way, philosophical sleight of hand. It's like, you can't uncover the fundamental nature of reality by sitting on an armchair and thinking about words and concepts. I mean, it's at most I think that even if this argument were right, I would just say it kind of demonstrates something about maybe the limits of language or something like that. I mean, it's kind of absurd to think. To me, it's absurd to think that you can establish idealism with this kind of argument. But the argument doesn't work anyway. So, actually, I don't think we're going to move on. I think we'll maybe pause here, and I will continue in a later video.